Well, I think the traditional advertising industry or the traditional advertising agency model is history.
Well, it's not history because it's still alive, but it might well be seriously broken because in the recent week or so, what we've seen is the probability that the SABC might join Media24, DSTV and a host of other media owners in reverting to a zero-based rate card, no commission in other words. And it's very, very simple. If I don't earn income by commission, I cannot be an agent. In every sense of the word, am I going to be an advertising agency if there's no more commission on the rate card? I become a consultant. And it's intriguing to notice that Advertising Age has as the #1 digital agency in the world a company called Accenture. We used to call them bean counters.
They came from that.
They're a management bunch of guys. So
they came from that Anderson Consulting, which went bank a few years ago.
What's for sure is they're not creative. In your and my understanding of it, it's a complete quantum shift for the industry, and we're going to have to learn to play by a whole set of new rules.
Well, I don't think there's anything wrong, by the way, with those new rules, because pretty much what the industry is beginning to do now, I think it's beginning to think like the consumer, because in the consumer's world, they don't think in terms of the compartmentalization of the industry, if you will. They pretty much
There's
think
nothing
about
wrong with the rules and changing the rules as long as you're winning, Thebe. If you're losing, you don't want the rules to be changed. Trust me.
If the rules to me are on the side of the consumer, then we're okay.
Then
and if we can break the traditional advertising model, because it is archaic, Gordon, as you know very well. And you know what we see with this, you talk
quite
about...
alarmed by the fact that you've put me in the same sentence comfortably as archaic, but nevertheless, I'm actually in agreement with you. But we also have to bear in mind what's right for consumers, you've said, what's right for advertisers. At the end of the day, we're a service industry. We've got to do what's right for advertisers, and what's right for advertisers is to do the right thing for consumers.
Indeed, indeed. But you know, enough about that. Let's get back on to today's topic.
Absolutely.
Because today must be a fascinating discussion. You know, getting into the idea of digital and where it fits in, because I think digital by definition has redefined the industry.
Well, consumers have redefined the way they consume media and engage with advertising, and they have actually changed the industry. We have to change to embrace the way they do things. Joining us in studio today is Jarred Cinman, Managing Director of Native VML and outgoing Chairman of the IAB.
And joining us from Nairobi in Kenya is Mark Kaigwa, the founder of Nendo, which is a strategy and storytelling agency for Digital Africa.
Jarred, let me start by asking you the first question, which really addresses what is the size of the digital agents or the digital market in South Africa? We're reporting 2% of ad spend, which seems ridiculous.
Yeah, look, the one thing we do know for certain is that number's wrong. So that we're 100% clear on. Getting an accurate number is very difficult. We've, at the IAB in the last couple of years, we've followed the global trend to get PricewaterhouseCoopers to do an independent piece of research that surveys the market and tries to peg a number that is more realistic, and that's this year's report's coming out shortly. The fundamental problem is that you've got, unlike every other media type, you have the lion's share of media spend flowing to global players like Google and Facebook, who will never report their data into something like Nielsen in South Africa. So our current measuring methodology is a non-starter in digital, and that's why we have a problem.
And doesn't it leave you with a real problem that the market thinks 2% is okay, when in actual fact it should be closer to 10, 11, 12, 13, 14?
So look, I think it does. It is a massive problem. It has been a massive problem. I think what you're starting to see is with global players, with multinationals, they're often dictating globally the size of the budget that people should be spending on digital. So you know, the source of information, whereas it might have been exclusively Nielsen in years past, people's perspectives have shifted, and I think that they're making different decisions, even though the data isn't necessarily supporting them.
And Mark, do you find that you still have this? You have the similar problems here that we're having in Southern Africa. Will you say it's a bit the same as well in East Africa, where you really don't have a handle on just how big this industry is or the size of this industry?
Well, thank you, Thebe. I think that I agree with Jarred in terms of the methodology is a bit hard to work backwards from. I mean, in Kenya, for instance, and that's certainly not speaking for all of East Africa, but it is a bellwether in some respects. We give or take say that it's 5%, and there's a plus or minus 1% margin of error, but it is hard to say. But what we do know is that now what we're seeing as recently as the last few weeks, a number of independent digital agencies are coming together in various forums to not necessarily compete against one another, but compete against the larger enemy, which is the percentage of spend that's going to digital, and trying to raise that. And to be fair, we've not even taken in account, I mean, you bring a good point about definitions, right? So is digital mobile? If so, what does that look like? Is it just online? Is it just social? And so that now brings the semantics discussion into the equation. And when you do that, you tend to broaden the percentage and it begins to rise up.
Mark, you've just mentioned a figure there of 5%, but if we look at some of the global markets, including some of the BRICS and other emerging markets, we're looking at 40, 50%. So whether we're talking 2, 5, 20, still pretty low. What are the barriers to adoption in Africa? What's preventing early adoption, given particularly the massive penetration of mobile into Africa?
Well, there's certainly something to be said for mobile as a channel itself, same way you could perhaps say that online is a channel too. And so people have learned and come to adopt and to grow into SMS, for instance, as one way of push marketing, if you like. And so if that's brought into the mix, then I actually suspect that we may be seeing higher numbers. But as Jarred said, when you're talking about a significant amount of spend, especially in the markets, the BRICS markets you mentioned, and more developed countries as well, it going to 40, 50%, then there you have a clear way of working backwards to see and know how traditional is faring. Whereas here, I mean, if you take Kenya, for instance, one of our major publishers here just invested, I think it's well over 2 billion shillings here, or yeah, that should be $20 million in a new printing press. So there's something they know and they're betting on in terms of print, and that's not the kind of thing you'd expect to see. Certainly not in developed markets where the trend is the opposite. So for them, it's a matter of survival, but for the rest of the market, it's about not necessarily competing on price, but more value and seeing as many different ways to expand that slice of the pie that digital gets now.
But you know, I want to speak a little bit more still on this measurement. What exactly, Jarred, is stopping this? Because now if we know that in developed markets, like you say, that they know the number, they know that about 40% or so, why can't you work backwards and use the same methodology? What is the barrier in our continent towards getting the right metrics? Or even here, let's say, forget the rest of the continent. Let's talk a country like South Africa, where people in general, people talk about digital or development. They talk about South Africa, Kenya, perhaps Nigeria as the three pillars of Africa's development. What is it so difficult for a country like South Africa, which has got all the resources, to be able to get together and give us the right statistics? Because now we're basing all decisions and all assumptions around digital on a number, on a metric we don't even know.
Look, there are a lot of things we do know about digital. So I think we mustn't get too stuck on the ad spend number, because I think there are challenges around maturity and whether publishers are willing to share those numbers. I mean, our experience at the IAB has been, it's taken us almost 3 years to convince the market to give us their data, because they're very concerned about sharing this information and is it secure, and it's so I think we mustn't get too stuck on the ad spend number. We know that over 50% of adult South Africans have got access to the internet in one form or the other. We know that smartphone penetration is growing at a radical speed. We know that that fiber and fast internet connections are growing very quickly. So you don't have to know the ad spend number to know that the medium is growing very, very rapidly, and that as an advertiser, if I'm not playing in that space, I'm going to be missing my market and missing an opportunity.
Yeah, and I think is one of the problems as well that there's been a drift away from traditional display advertising, which was relatively easy to measure even against a nominal rate card. But that's drying up. We've got a whole social media revolution going on, and that is really difficult to measure. I mean, how do I place a value on a like on Facebook, for instance?
Correct. And I think that, and actually, social media is the least of our worries. Most of what people are using the internet for is some kind of direct communication, some kind of chat type communication, or things like Snapchat, things like WhatsApp, things like WeChat, that kind of stuff. That's even more difficult because you're not even, that's what they call it, dark social. This is not even a place we have measurement technology running at this point. So it is a little unfair to compare digital, to use that one word and compare that to, say, TV. Digital is many hundreds of different things, very fragmented and very complex, and getting to the data is a lot more difficult. Even though there's a lot of direct data, it's a lot more difficult to actually harvest it and get to single numbers that everybody agrees on. It'll get there in a form, but it is immature on this continent, and I don't think international models necessarily apply because the context is very different.
Jarred, I don't think I'm going to let you go so easily on this measurement business, particularly because it is the core of your business. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, I want us to spend just a couple of more comments on this, just probe a little bit more on this idea of measurement in digital marketing.